Okay, so October 23rd, build work group meeting, and we can start now. So, Ryan, anything you want to mention before we start?
Right. I just wanted to a sort of question about different GitHub Action Accelerator infrastructure tooling things have come up. We've had namespace.so and blacksmith.sh as both, some options. And I just wanted to kind of maybe add that to the agenda real quick, if we could kind of briefly discuss a mild future potential, or if we're still stuck kind of thing.
Sure, yeah. Do you mind adding it here?
Sure. I will add it.
Okay. All right, so while that's being added, let's go ahead and start with the first one, updating infrastructure provider list. Um,
I think we determined that we were thinking that we shouldn't be maintaining the infrastructure provider list in multiple places, and that the singular point of thank yous and whatever would be the on the website, and not something we also hold in the README in the repo. Is that what I'm remembering correctly from the last meeting?
I think we did discuss that, yes. Kind of makes sense. I did note that there are a few major providers that we are currently using that are not on the website. So the website has been updated now, but I'm guessing that's probably because the ones that are on the website are the ones that we've got like formal agreements over,
Mm-hmm.
and Node is still using resources donated by other companies that maybe we don't have the formal agreements with. Maybe that's the reason they're not there, or maybe they've just been oversighted. I don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
there is a couple. I can identify a couple of providers that we definitely have in the CI that are not on the public website, but are in the Node README. But even like let's pick one out of the air. I think OSU is not on there, for example. So again,
Uh,
we are definitely dependent on some of the resources that they have kindly provided to the project. So I guess that's a question as to what is actually whether there was more stricter criteria to prevent things being on the website, or whether that's just an oversight. But I mean, that's probably worth um, having a. And then I guess I can't remember where it was. I think I saw somewhere someone was suggesting that we should have a list of what we are using and then compare that to what the list is on the public thing, and then see where the gaps, or the things that we are using that aren't currently uh, listed somewhere. But I don't know whether that's in this issue or some other place to. I mean, it's not mentioned in this issue, but whether this issue is the one we use to work that one through.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, for the stuff on the README, which is where the current this issue is talking about, what's in the node that the README on the build working group website, sorry, what GitHub repo. There is a list there. The list is updatable if we wanted to update it. I agree that if might makes more sense to have the singular list if possible. But then there's also like a whole bunch of logos for the providers, which I'm always skeptical about with how we update those, whether we can just go and pull off logos from a website, or whether we need to clear those with the foundation, which is again why if we're already putting up logos on the public website, then why do we need to worry about all of that on the Node.js README? And it might just be we either redirect people straight to the website, or have a very short list and then redirect people to the website. But I think the main reason we have the list is for visibility, and I'm not convinced that the README of the build repo is the most visible place uh, for to provide the exposure for the providers that are donating hardware and resources to the Node project.
Yeah, the people reading the README are the people on the build and infrastructure team mostly, and figure, if you're
Yeah,
new to the team and you're not sure what we're using, then well, hopefully the Ansible inventory is a better way of figuring that out than a kind of thank you list that that
yeah. I
also
mean,
gets outdated.
you're right. It helps in terms of onboarding people into the build working group, but it's not really where we want the source of like oh, we some company offers some resources to Node, and we say, yeah, we'll give you exposure, and the exposure, well, I mean, we can expose people in the build working group, but that's going to have a very limited reach compared to, say, the public website or other avenues that the project has. So yeah, yeah, I think we should update. Whether the update is like we remove most of it from the README and redirect people to the public website, and then if it is the public website that we say is the singular source of truth, then we should also then discuss about the providers that are currently missing from that.
Right. Okay. Who do we need to coordinate with on the public website? And like we're saying,
So
we've got providers that aren't there, that aren't necessarily got a formal agreement with us, but are giving us stuff.
I
Who
don't.
makes that determination?
I'm guessing it's OpenJS marketing.
Oh, okay.
As in, I don't think it's necessarily the website. I think it will go into the website because the content is on the website repo. But I'm guessing that for putting things up on the public website, if it's like another company, and especially if we're going to use the other company's logo, then that presumably needs to be cleared by the foundation to just make sure we're promoting the companies that the foundation want promoted up there, and that we have the proper agreements that we can reuse the logos and things. I'm not one of those that's just going to put a logo up and a README when that logo belongs to another company, and we're not sure whether we can use that. So.
Right, and the marketing people know exactly where to go for your brand identity guidelines and things like that, and they're the ones that understand people's requirements surrounding that. So,
yeah,
and they've also got access to whatever agreements were made with those companies to say, well, you will do it this, and this is the logo we want you to use, and we're not, just like you said, pulling it from their fave icon and blowing it up or doing.
So I think whatever is now there on the website, that was the website team, but I think they then pulled in people from the foundation marketing or branding or whatever it was to review the stuff before it was all merged to make sure it was satisfactory. So yeah, we either talk about it in the issue and then ping people in the foundation, or we open issues on the open a pull request in the public website and then ping whoever it is we need to talk to in the foundation. I mean, I'd probably start with someone like Kylie or someone, but
okay,
I'm sure we'll find people, but yeah,
I will take on the just make the list that should be there. Just make the list of who we use and not update anything else. Just make that list so I can provide it to somebody and say, here's what we're using.
Yeah, and if you do that, if you want to run that past the rest of us, just either put it in the issue or whatever have you, or because it should be public. If it isn't, then we can have that discussion. But like I said, we've got an Ansible inventory, so if it's anything in Ansible, then it's all public.
Yeah, and there's also a question of there's infrastructure that we have people giving us servers, but there's also things like vendors that are giving us tools like this hackmd.io thing. I have no idea if this is something that's being donated to the
that's been donated. That's been donated. The hackmd stuff has been donated to the open. Sorry, not is that the right one? There is a agreement with the OpenJS Foundation for hackmd use in OpenJS as a whole.
So I guess I'm saying there's hosting and there's also tooling that we may have agreements with and stuff.
So Build's responsibility is specifically for infrastructure, mainly around CI now. It used to include the website, but that was before we moved the website and everything to Vercel. So I might need to talk to the TSC to see whether we should formally separate the website responsibility from Build, because I don't think anyone in the current Build working group actually is involved in the day-to-day running of the website today. So there is a team doing that, but I think it's kind of technically, if you look at the governance of Node, it's technically Build's in the governance of the responsibilities the Build working group look after. But I think the reality is that nobody in the working group is currently looking at that. But I mean, that's a technicality thing. So some of the toolings that the Build working group owns are directly the servers and the CI systems, but it does include some of the things like the backup servers, those the unencrypted stuff that we talked about before.
Yep.
That's that's a legacy of when we used to host the website ourselves. But it does cross over to downloads. So, again, we used to host the downloads. I mean, we still do host the downloads. It's just no one's really hitting those endpoints anymore, hopefully, because of R2. So, there's always
Right.
But yeah, in terms of things like HackMD, that's at the more higher level, which is it's not really a build thing. So that's that. Well, that one's actually at the OpenJS level on behalf of all the projects under OpenJS.
Okay.
But like, for example, I think Cloudflare is kind of technically Node because Node was technically the build working group because the build working group owned the web presence. So again, you're right. We have things like Cloudflare, which are services rather than particular servers. And
yeah,
I think even that, the agreement is now, well, I mean, that was part of the part of the transition stuff, wasn't it? Was to try and get more of those agreements pushed up to the OpenJS level rather than build
right,
managing or not really managing those.
right,
So
right.
yeah, it's kind of
Yeah, so even just enumerating that these are things that we touch or see or interact with would be helpful because when this stuff
I think
does
so,
go to the website, we can say, well, the build working group manages Cloudflare for these things, and the web team does this, and we use HackMD to manage our meetings and keep notes on everything that's going, like just whatever we touch, whether we're responsible for it or not, just having that information.
I think the best thing is if there's any doubt, put it in the list, and then we can all review the list and say, yeah, actually that's a real thing, but it's actually managed under here or something, and then continue the discussion that way. I think.
Right.
I think it's better to suggest something that may or may not be true, but rather than omit something because we're trying to prematurely optimize or edit out things.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, we'll enumerate a list, and I'll talk to JS marketing and the web team about well, where does this actually live? Where's it going to go? Cool.
Okay. Perfect. Next item would be upgrading the chain, the tool chain. Anything else remains here, or so AX still going.
Yeah, so we've got a few platforms, AX, IBMI. I don't know if SmartOS will, but they are all, those three are still on GCC. I think the Hetzner machines are still on.
Yes.
So they're on an older version of Ubuntu that doesn't have the version of CLang that we want.
Got it. I'm trying to figure out with the JS Foundation, like the Hetzner machines are really the only machines that we're just paying for. And so the question arises of like, do we provide infrastructure build working group members with access to an account to spend money when we're not necessarily sure if like the card that's attached to that account is able to do stuff like spend and buy 2 more servers so that we can build the new ones out while the other ones are running and then take the other ones down. But like just having access to all of that, like billing and financial side of things. This feels like it's going to happen slowly enough that I'll just stand up 2 servers and hook them back in, and everyone can just SSH back in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if ultimately we need to be having issues or somehow getting issues into the infrastructure project that the OpenJS infrastructure project board to track it at some other level. If it's like we need to request it rather than something that the build work group just does. This is specifically for the Hetzner machines, then that's what we do. But I mean, in terms of machines that are outstanding to upgrade the compiler tool chains, it is the three platforms that Milad has documented there in notes, and the Hetzner machines, I think, are the only Ubuntu machines that we've not upgraded yet. And that's on Access. That's an Access thing.
So interestingly enough, those 3 platforms kind of dovetail into the next bullet point that we have on the list there, which is these platforms are. What's the term in Node for what tier of support there are for different platforms? Like, what's the
Oh, that's so there's tier 1, tier 2, and experimental. Those are in the building document in the main repo, which I will bring a link to. No, not that one. That is in. That's in the building file that's in the main node repo has a list of platforms, and it categorizes the platforms into tiers. Tier 1 platforms basically means that we can't. Well, there's a technical difference between. Not a technical difference. There's what's described here, which is, we can't do a release without a tier 1 platform being available in the release. When we build the releases, we definitely need the tier 1 platforms. So if a tier 1 platform isn't there, it should stop the release. There's a little bit of wiggle room over tier 2, but I don't think we've ever actually, we try not to release if a tier 2 platform is not also available. And then experimental is like we don't release binaries on those. So just because it's on the screen, like the long Loom 64, for example, it's experimental. I don't think we've even got no, that's not true, is it? There may be something running in the CI for that, but we're not building releases on that, so we don't block releases on that.
We don't even know if they're blocked.
Yeah, pretty much. So that's the current tiering. So most of the tier 1s are like Windows, Mac OS, and then Linux on x64 and ARM, I think. And then other platforms like, so for example, Linux on, again, because it's on the screen, Linux on S390, also known as Linux One. That's the tier 2 platform. It's, in practice, we try and make sure the binaries for those are available before we do, as we do releases. And, if they're not there or there's problems on those platforms, we try and delay the release a bit. But that's the current tiering. The tiering does go up and down. So at one point, we used to build 32-bit Windows binaries for Node, and like I can't remember if Node 20 still supports that, but we did drop it at some point. So we downgraded the tiering from like tier 1 down to experimental. But that usually happens on some of the major boundaries. So if we decide to drop a platform, and that might be something not right now, but we discussed about like one of the questions that came up recently was maybe it's time we start talking about dropping Intel Mac OS. Because all the new Macs are ARM based, they're not Intel based.
Yeah.
And I think, is it Mac OS 26 was announced to be the last version that would support?
It is,
Intel
yeah. So the next
chipsets?
version of Mac OS that comes out will not have Intel support. So
again, it's like at some point Node will make a decision. Is this harder to keep going in terms of support than is an option to drop support in the next Semver major of Node, and then that brings forward the date where we can say, we no longer need those platforms in the CI, which there's always a degree of forward planning for all this. So hopefully that was a long-winded way of answering your question about tiering for these platforms.
No, it's great and gives me some context, because the sort of next thing on the list is there's some discussions about here we have these GitHub Actions accelerator providers that are offering to hey, we can give you machines and let you run your GitHub Actions really fast. And if I understand correctly, the main blocker for us to move from Jenkins to GitHub Actions and use GitHub Actions entirely is the fact that we have platforms that are not supported by GitHub Actions, that we just don't have any other way to test unless we're using Jenkins, right?
Okay.
And so based off that, all of our tier 1 platforms we can do on GitHub Actions, with the exception of maybe the x64 Mac OS. Like the tier 2 ones, it looks like we're pretty close. I'm not sure. There was in the Slack in the build working group, I found this blog post about GitHub Actions runner for IBM Power and Linux One.
Yeah, those are all.
I don't know if those are working, or if that's that was a year or something, a year and a half ago. Do we know if that's even a remote possibility?
If we really wanted it, I'm sure I could find someone in IBM to talk to.
Yeah,
I do work for them. Those are the Linux platforms, so it won't cover, for example, AX, IBM I, SmartOS.
got it.
I
Okay,
think
so those are
SmartOS, I think you can run on a Linux x64 host in a container,
mhm.
but definitely you can't do that for AX or IBM I. So it, you know,
This-
it will be some of those platforms, not all of them. So in terms of GitHub Actions, there in my without wanting to sound like the Spanish Inquisition, there are three reasons I believe that we haven't really pursued moving stuff to GitHub Actions. So one is the primary one, like you said, is not all the platforms we support are there,
mhm,
and it does make things a lot easier at the moment for the release pipeline if everything is in the same place. So at the
mhm.
moment, the release pipeline just looks at Jenkins. It doesn't really go out to GitHub to try and then work out a combination of GitHub plus Jenkins means that you can release. We kind of do it in practice, but it's more a case of, well, the PR handles the GitHub side of things, and then the release happens afterwards, which is not at the time the PR is going in. So there's platform coverage, and then there's also things like if you go to GitHub runners, unless you're willing to self-host the runners, you are then tied to GitHub's upgrade schedule. So we have found, for example, that workflows in GitHub will break because they will upgrade something from one version of the operating system to another, and then it's not just the operating system upgraded; they'll change other components in the image, and then we find the workflow doesn't work anymore on that, and then we have to do some remedial work. There's obviously a loss of control of things if you're not self-hosting.
Right.
Um, so
And to be fair, some of these providers, are providing us machines to run on. We could probably negotiate. Well, and please don't upgrade them out from underneath us. Like let us
yeah, and
let us
then
coordinate and
I guess there's additional things like I don't think these are going to be unsurmountable, but there are things like secrets, credentials, all those kind of things.
right.
One of the things I wouldn't know, for example, is no, maybe it can be worked out. Yeah, I don't know. I was going to talk about signing releases, but I mean that's probably not.
Oh, that's actually ridiculously easier on GitHub because
No. We don't
oh
sign releases at all on the remote machines. They're all signed on developer machines.
I see what you mean. Those kind of
But
signings.
that's
Yes.
probably okay. Yeah, it's probably okay. But there are some challenges which I don't think are insurmountable. At the moment, we don't have secrets in GitHub at all for accessing any of the Jenkins infrastructure.
Hmm.
But it's just, and not just the Jenkins, even like the staging servers. So there's nothing in GitHub that can push to the stage directly to the staging stuff. Again, if we decide to do that transformation, it's not it's not a technical insurmountable things, but obviously then we need to be careful about access
Hmm.
and stuff. But yeah, I think the main reason is that without it looking like we could wholly go to GitHub Actions, it's like, well, at the moment we're wholly in Jenkins,
Hmm.
at least from the release pipeline point of view.
Yeah.
That we now have, at the moment we have a current working setup that's fairly, I don't want to say simple because it's obviously not simple, but everything's
Right.
in the one place. Whereas,
Everything is set up and it's connected and it's running
yeah,
and it's
so, so, so,
built.
so in my head, it's either like you have one thing in everything in Jenkins is one thing. The other extreme is you have everything in GitHub Actions. And then the bit in the middle to me is sort of that's more complexity because then you're now reliant on two things. And
Yeah, and
the one last thing I was going to mention was that our current setup where things are Jenkins um, does give us the freedom should things go sour with GitHub, which I really hope they never do.
well, yeah.
But but if worst came to worst and we wanted to move the Node project to some other Git based hosting, it would be painful. But I can see that it would technically be feasible today. That if someone said in a week's time we need to move off GitHub to I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot like GitLab or something like that.
Right.
We would have to update a lot of things, but we would still be in control of all of the testing and release hardware that we have, and we would not be affected by having to migrate off GitHub and then the actions in ecosystem. And again, maybe the project might decide that that's that risk is so remote that it's not something to hedge against.
I mean,
I'm a little reluctant to give up that hedge without, clear, obvious benefits.
Right, because I mean,
Yeah.
It's a little bit like that guy in the Matrix eating the meat and just being like, forget it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to stay in here. I don't care. I'm going to get in GitHub Actions. I'm just going to ignore all the problems that come along with it, because this is what everyone else is doing. Everyone's offering us resources and things we can use in there. We can maybe speed up the builds, But you're right. When Microsoft lays off a bunch of GitHub employees and removes their CEO and everything starts to become more Microsofty in there and it becomes less GitHubian, things start to feel different. And when Microsoft stops being so generous with their minutes across the open source community and, kind of tightens that screw a little bit, it may become an issue where people are like, well, now what are we going to do? And it's like, there's nothing else to do besides set up your own Jenkins server. So yeah, it's really just a question of like, there's good reasons to stay. The maintaining the infrastructure is something, though. Like there's a certain amount of like we start to just hand stuff over to service providers, and the pipeline can then be managed a lot easier with the developers in the Node project, as opposed to this is all stuff that happens on Jenkins and only a couple people have access to it. Or I don't know. There's pluses and minuses both ways. I'm just kind of curious, kind of teasing it apart, because one of the things that I thought was a blocker was IBM, and it sounds like, well, maybe it's not, but that's only for half of it. Is that what I'm understanding? Like we would still be blocked on a couple of platforms.
We would still be blocked on a couple of platforms. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't for the Linux platform for the Linux platforms for the link you found. It wasn't for the want of trying. I believe there were discussions with GitHub about getting the other architectures into standard runners.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm assuming it came down to a question of cost and sponsorship and who was paying for them. So
yeah, I mean, does someone feel like, to me, anybody that has a platform that they want on GitHub Actions should be building it themselves, and
I think that's
Microsoft should be
position. Yeah.
So and then Microsoft should be providing the APIs and here's what you need to build this runner. Here, compile it yourself.
So then the question is, let's say for the sake of argument, it's Linux and IBM on Power and 390, just because there is a potential program to use, or even the accelerators. The question then is like, in theory we could be using those, but then what's the cost? It's like, are those providers going to be donating credits, or are they just going to say, if it's an open source project, you can use these machines? It's like I don't know. It's necessarily going to be a free thing. And I mean, IBM does sponsor the OpenJS Foundation, so I'm sure if we decide that's what we want to pursue, we could probably find an agreement or amend the agreement or whatever that is. I'm not too worried about if that's really what we decide we want about, getting machines connected to that. But it is a kind of, it's a case of, if we decide that that's where we want to head to, then the questions are things like, well, how are we going to implement them, and then where are these resources coming from? Because they won't be provided by GitHub, so it's like
and so
are they coming from another provider, or are they other providers going to give us machines like we have at the moment, and then we have to figure out how to run a GitHub runner on them?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of another sort of aspect to this, is that the providers that we had 5-10 years ago that were offering stuff up to us were providers that had infrastructure, and they had rack space, and they had space in a rack, and they had bare metal machines, they had everything. Now everybody that we're encountering that is offering generosity is all tied into this other ecosystem, and they're all offering GitHub Actions machines and offering and so we're the stream of what we normally rely on type of generosity is sort of drying up and turning into a different, the river's rerouting. And so it's like there's also that aspect of maybe looking at it from that angle of there are more providers now. Granted, some of these providers are early stage venture funded startups that might just collapse in 2 years and disappear, and we have built our infrastructure on presuming that exists and not in a resilient sort of way, and then suddenly the rug gets pulled and we're like, well, now what? So that is also a consideration that we have to take into account, that new startup X isn't necessarily what we want to build on.
In some ways, you're right, and so what you said earlier about like the stuff that we're still using what we've been using forever. The providers have changed, but basically the Jenkins setup is not too dissimilar to what was set up when IOJS forked from Node.js, prior to it all coming back together again. And it's seen off like Travis, which came before GitHub Actions. So lots of stuff has sprung up in the ecosystem, the wider ecosystem. Here's a CI/CD setup that projects can use, and I mean, I don't see GitHub going away anytime soon, hopefully, but it's a case of we've got something that works. It might be that a better future migration is to migrate to something else, but with everything, it's a case of trying to trade off the pros and cons, and then also, if you're going to move to anything else, then that's work, and who is doing that work
right
to get us there, given that we've got a live system. So we are either going to have to do surgery on the live system or somehow come up with a parallel system that we can then switch over at some point in the future, which again,
I think
I'm sure is manageable with Will, but it's kind of
well, I think that's the first part of this whole question is the will even there? Like, do we have a compelling reason to even attempt or plan or discuss something like this, or does it still feel like let's just keep going on with what we're going on? Because I bring this up now because we just released Node 25, and the release cycle is starting up on the next big hump of things, and now's the time for these kind of changes, it feels like. So it's just sort of a kind of question there. I mean, and the what's Jenkins, what's GitHub Actions kind of thing, and what if we bifurcated kind of thing is also a question of, well, what if we drew the line along tier support? What if, in order to be a tier 1 or tier 2 provider, you have to provide GitHub Actions runners, and if you're not, then we consider you experimental, and then we'd run releases on the Jenkins machines for experimental releases on a different cycle from the actual release, or
we don't do releases on experimental platforms. And
okay, well, or even maybe tier 2s on Jenkins. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, maybe the tier is where you draw the line, or but because I don't.
We can have those discussions somewhere. I don't know whether it's here or somewhere else.
But I think the only other thing I'm not real clear on is what are we doing with GitHub Actions now? Like when some of the Mac OS infrastructure falls over and they're like, well, we can use the GitHub Actions. So is that actually running tests, or is it some sort of sub tests, or is it some sort of like what's the
tests. So we are running some tests on GitHub Actions on Linux and Mac OS. And I think on Windows we're building but not running tests, and I cannot remember the reason for that. Probably need someone to go in and try. I think it might have been some of the tests weren't reliable in the GitHub runs. But having said that, I think even today some of the tests are not reliable on the Mac OS runners in GitHub Actions. So it's, well, to be honest, they're not that reliable on the Jenkins stuff we've got either.
They're not.
But so we've always had the Jenkins stuff, and then when GitHub Actions came in, there was this idea that because the only people that can start Jenkins CI runs are collaborators, that it would be easier to give some feedback to people from outside the project that open pull requests. If when they open the pull requests, they had a CI run on their contributions. I think that's slightly not proven. It's slightly not happened now because of concerns about running CIs blindly on code that could have come from anywhere. So now GitHub by default requires a collaborator to approve a PR from a new, from someone who hasn't contributed before, so they don't get the things automatically run. But yeah, it means that we do run some stuff on GitHub Actions as a kind of additional check, but not a critical check, if that makes sense. In that, okay, we do have things where if you want to learn the things, they need to pass both the GitHub checks and the Jenkins checks. But if either one of those, well, no, not really Jenkins. GitHub, we kind of say like, if it turns out that GitHub updates a runner and we suddenly have a whole bunch of failures, we'll just temporarily just turn that off because it's not on the super critical path.
Right.
But yeah, we hit things like, they just update things and they say, you need to migrate by such and such a date. That's fine if you're just looking at the main branch, but if you're looking at Node 20, you're now in this situation where, well, we said you could build on this with this level of compiler, but if that compiler is not available, then you're in the situation where you've either got to have things, I guess, in containers, if it's possible to containerize your build process, or you are going to be reliant on a thing that you have very little control over, which is the runners and their ability to. I mean, they do things like, I think at one point they migrated macOS, and then there was much less space in the macOS runner, and a lot of people, including us, started running out of disk space on the GitHub runner, which again is not it's not the easiest of things to solve.
Right. Suddenly all the macOS builds are breaking and you're like, what's wrong? And they're all running out of disk space. It's like, well, we don't have any control over that.
Yeah. And I think even to this day, the solution was, there's all this other stuff that's in the runner that if you're not using it, you can delete, which kind of you can, but it's a bit messy. But, again, it's a trade-off, right? So it is on the one hand, you're not, you, for example, spending all your time chasing infrastructure providers to get stuff on that. But on the other hand, then it does mean that we have more control about, this is when we update Xcode versions. This is when we go to a new version of whatever.
Side note on infrastructure provider chasing, I do have a meeting with Max Stadium today to discuss having a more dedicated shared storage so that the ephemeral storage that they sort of give out that they've deprecated is replaced by something they support.
So again, without getting too technical into the ins and outs of individual platforms, that's a thing which is, I don't know how that would work in GitHub. GitHub, whether if we try to push the C cache into, so on GitHub Actions you do get cache storage, but you only get so much of it. So I don't know, can that withstand all of the caching we're currently doing? Or would we find that as we push more and more platforms into GitHub Actions, are we just going to use up that allowance? And again, that might be surmountable with discussions between GitHub and the foundation, but it's things that are not readily apparent when you just talk about the high level. Can we?
Yeah, we can't even tell if the grass is greener because there's so much of the grass we can't even see.
Yes, I think that's correct. So, yeah, it's not that it's, well, there's obviously some high technical challenges which are platforms that are not currently pluggable into GitHub Actions. And that's partly because I believe this is still true that the runner infrastructure is written in .NET.
Really?
.NET has not been ported in. So .NET has not been ported to all operating systems. So it is on, for example, Linux, which is, I guess, how IBM did like Linux and Power and Linux and 390. So I believe they still had to do some work to get that port running on those architectures. But at least they had a starting point, which is they could use Mono, which I believe is the .NET equivalent in Linux. But there were issues years and years ago asking if the GitHub runners could either be migrated to something more platform neutral than .NET, or if maybe some public APIs could be published that then other people could write to plug into the APIs. I believe they were all shelved due to lack of available resources on the GitHub side to pursue those, or maybe it suited them that everything was locked into what they were provided. But I don't know that there's going to be a feasible path for the platforms that are not currently plugged into GitHub Actions to be plugged into it.
Yeah, I don't see C# becoming a supported tool chain in SmartOS anytime soon.
Who knows? I don't know. I'm not on that, but I mean, yeah, those are the challenges with some of the other platforms. And I guess the challenge or interesting discussion there is that you look at those three platforms, AX, IBM, and SmartOS, and we've had conversations around the turn of the year where people are saying, like, why are we supporting these platforms in Node? Why aren't those companies supporting, the companies that are interested in those platforms supporting? And the simple answer is they are kind of supporting Node on those platforms. They're donating resources in terms of both hardware and employees to try and troubleshoot platform issues on those platforms. So actually, if you look at Node as a whole and say you pick an individual platform in Node, even like the tier ones, and you say, who is actually supporting that platform in terms of open source support? It tends to be that those on the lower tiers are the ones that have companies that have donated stuff to the project to help those platforms along. And some of the stuff like Mac OS is kind of like, well, we're not really getting anything from Apple on that. And we're looking for either volunteers or other companies to step up to try and help the community manage those. It's the reality, which is the ones that are donating stuff to the project tend to be the ones that you would look at and say, well, those are smaller platforms or those are niche platforms. But those are niche platforms with companies that are willing to spend the money to support. So,
and Apple's just sort of a have to because so many developers use that as their local machine.
Yeah. This is an aside, really. I got frustrated when they switched from Intel to ARM, and then just assumed every software provider would just jump at the chance of supporting their ARM platform, and you had to pay them for the privilege of getting early access to the hardware. So it's kind of like, yeah, you're paying Apple. So rather than them reaching out and helping you upgrade to their new hardware, they were expecting people to reach out to them and pay them for the privilege of supporting their new hardware. It's just a different way of working, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think we've kind of talked this through. This is good. I mean, it's it comes up every once in a while. We got to like kind of revisit it and stuff. And community members are like, hey, we look at this, and it's like, well, there's more to it than just this startup is offering us something for free. We should just take it.
It's a healthy conversation, and it's just be prepared. Not just people watching this, but not just people here on the call, but anyone watching this in the future. If you want to bring this up, bring it up. Just be prepared to then discuss further complications than a very simple high level. Why don't we just switch? It is going to be work, even if we figure out that it's possible.
Yeah, it took the Drupal community years to go from a self-hosted Git solution to using GitLab and then switching over to GitLab CI. Like that was a years long project with many people involved, and
the main thing we have is that we have to be able to continue to release Node. So it's not like we're going to pause the project for a year while we transition everything over. Even moving our downloads to R2, I think took over a year.
Yeah.
I mean, it sort of sped up. It went slowly and then sped up towards the end. But the amount of planning to try and do something to the live system without messing up the live system is not insignificant.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so I guess we already covered all this, right?
Yep. That was it.
Yeah. Perfect. I guess next one would be Rust support on temporal support.
So
anything.
So I don't think anything has changed in terms of progress, but I think the next item for us is to start getting the Rust compilers onto the CI machines to then enable, assuming there are other people outside of this group that are willing to help do the actual changes to Node to support temporal with Rust. Once we get the toolchain on the machines, then we can start doing experiments. Well, I say we as in Node, not just us, do the experiments to get that working. So I think you've done some upstream work, haven't you, Milad, on like Rust for the IBM, Linux and Power and Linux and 390. So we can work out from that, what are good compilers to target to get onto the machines, and then get those onto the machines via Ansible, and then from there see where that takes the actual support.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for that patch to land. I'm hoping it should land soon. And yeah, that should probably help things get started. It's specific to PPCS 390, but I'm sure you could leverage things for it.
We're going to need so in order to support temporal in Node, we are going to need a Rust compiler that can compile the I can't remember, is it called temporal? Whatever the actual module in upstream V8 is that
it's temporal.
Yeah. So if you want temporal in V8 to supply the temporal functions, we're going to need Rust on that platform. So if Rust isn't available on that platform, then we're going to have to, for now, compile without. But even saying, we have Rust available on that platform, we still need to do work in upstream Node to convert the GYP build system to make the right calls to the compiler to compile the Rust code. That there is that to figure out. So the first thing is to get the compilers on there. Obviously, we would then need to make sure that the stuff is building in upstream V8. So that's the work you're doing on Power and 390. But let's assume, for example, that Linux on Intel works in upstream V8, but we would still need to convert that into something that works on us for Node on the Jenkins run, or even in the GitHub runners. On anything that we're building Node in, we're going to have to decide what is the requirement that you. So we're not like so for those that aren't too familiar with upstream V8, upstream V8 works on the basis that all of their build tooling is managed in terms of, if you're on, say, Linux or Intel, Google hosts all of their build tooling in a repository somewhere, and the whole build contribution process to V8 says, you put down this particular repository or repositories at this commit level, and you will get a compiler, well, several compilers now. You get Rust compiler, you'll get a CLang compiler, and that's what upstream V8 uses to build. Node doesn't do that. Node says, at the moment, Node says you need a C compiler, CLang, for example, or GCC for some of the older releases. And if you have that C compiler and Python, you should be able to take the Node repository, clone that, and build. You don't need to pull anything else down from the internet other than the Node source code, as long as you have the build tooling already available on your machine. So, Rust support will require us to add Rust as an additional requirement, or maybe an additional optional requirement. But definitely to build this thing, we'll need Rust. And currently Node doesn't pull down something at build time. So, it isn't going to be feasible for Node to say, oh, when you kick off your build, we will go and pull down a Rust compiler at build time. That's not how Node builds. And, for downstream builders, I'm thinking Linux distros or, Electron or whatever, I suspect they, from a supply chain point of view, you don't want Node build process pulling things down at build time that you're not aware of. So it's just a different way of building. So.
Okay. So that's that item. Let me close these two. Anything else we want to talk about? I guess there's no other items here, right? Yeah. Okay. Anything else we want to talk about?
I just wanted to mention that one of the things that's sort of been bubbling up on the web infra side of things is we'd like to start managing Cloudflare with Terraform, because right now there's a whole lot of like ClickOps happening inside of the Cloudflare configuration and setup, and that could all be set up with pull requests and have it managed in a much more simpler way.
So there's an issue in the build repo, which I can't remember if it's closed off or not, but there's definitely an issue that was open on the build repo, which I should be looking for now, to cover that, because it
Mhm.
was something that Ulysses looked at briefly and had something that was mirroring some of the stuff into a repository. And it was just one of those things which is like, we all supported the idea in principle, but we wanted to be quite cautious
Mhm.
before adopting it. And I think we never got to the stage where it was like, yes, we think we can now push this so that we are pushing changes rather than mirroring changes. I think that's just one of those where I think Build is supportive of that in general, that there's no actual objections to using Terraform to manage it. The question is who has the time and the capability to push that through. But there was work started, which I'll try and find a reference to. Oh, there we go. Paste it in here, and I'll paste it into the minutes. So yeah, there was a previous attempt which has stalled.
Yeah, I think I've seen that pull request for that. Um, I'd like to revisit that just because there's a Cloudflare
Yeah,
now has a tool that allows you to do a lot of like take what's already configured and turn it back into Terraform so that you're now managing the existing state. So
yeah.
that is something I want to.
I can't remember if that's what Ulysses was using,
Okay.
or whether there's even newer tooling than whatever it was.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure this
I'm
is
fairly
2 years
certain he
ago
was.
and so much has
Yeah,
changed. So
I'm fairly certain he wasn't manually writing the Terraform configuration. He was running
right, right.
something to mirror the configuration. And I think we just never got to the point where we said, so I think the challenge was, it was like, here's a pull request, let's review it. And it's kind of, the rest of us were looking at thinking, well, it kind of looks okay. I mean, we're not that, it's one of those things which, I think it probably makes sense, but most of us aren't that familiar with Terraform. So
Yeah.
it's kind of, if you're given a pull request to say this is the configuration, well, you've got to be somewhat familiar with Cloudflare, or at least have the access to Cloudflare to say, well, what is the configuration we're currently using? And then
Right.
do
And
these
this is
Terraform
like
scripts actually? Yes.
and
Yeah.
on the cloud ops team for the Linux Foundation, this is primarily what I'm doing on the other side of things is
Yeah.
managing Cloudflare and using Terraform to manage Cloudflare for all a lot of different projects. So
And,
this is
and,
something that's sort of in my wheelhouse. So
I think this is one of the things that, when we first talked about getting the foundation involved in helping the Build working group manage some of its responsibilities, is if there are things that the foundation are doing which they're already doing for other projects, and it makes sense that Node should be doing the same thing, then yeah, if you've got the experience on the foundation side of running, managing Cloudflare through Terraform, then why not do that for Node? Other than, we need help or someone to help us do that migration, or the foundation takes that over completely and does that migration for us. But it's kind of, I don't think anyone is objecting to it. It's just a case of like, how does it actually happen? Because
right,
Ulysses spent some time on it, and then it stalled out because he's spending his time elsewhere now. So
right. So I guess all I'm saying is bring this up is that like I'm doing a lot of focus on this stuff in other areas. I'd like to
yes,
dovetail it into like I can add this in as something we should be addressing for our
yeah,
Cloudflare.
because I think we did have on the list of somewhere where there was a presentation that said like, here are the things the foundation believes it can take over, and like, in terms of like a plan of like, not right this minute, but like in the future, I think managing the Cloudflare stuff was one of those things on a bullet point on there, which was like, in an ideal world, that most of the Cloudflare config would be done like Linux Foundation managed, and then whatever the process for the project to request changes would go through that. But at the moment, it's still in this house where, you know, it's owned by Build. So Build has the administrator access, and then you have, and I think we added an account for the foundation. I can't remember.
Yeah, no, we've got access.
Yeah. So,
I have to see.
so again, it's like
I'll have to see whether or not we've got super admins or not, or I can't remember. But
so I think this was one of the things that we agreed. You know, we agreed that Build did not have a problem with handing over the management of Cloudflare to the foundation, but things like the how would that actually work in practice, and things like should it migrate to something like Terraform? Yeah, those are all yes if people have time to help do the transitions. So yeah, I don't know if there's stuff you can reuse in what Ulysses did, or whether you just take what you were doing.
Yeah, I'll look at it.
But I
sure.
think I think generally, I think we'd be all supportive.
Okay.
It's just sort of don't break anything.
Yep.
Easier said than done, but yeah, that's the thing with all of this, which is like, yeah, we can do this, and yeah, how do we make
sure? Be very careful and make sure nothing is disturbed.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, perfect. We got 1 minute left. Anything else we want to talk about? Nope. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and if there is nothing else, I'll stop the webinar.